Welcome back to Detailed, an original podcast by RCAT. This is a show where we uncover lessons learned to help you navigate your next project. I'm Cherise Lakeside, Senior Spec Writer at RDH Building Science, and your host. My guest today is Sean Ronnie Hill, founder and director from Rise Design Studio, a London and Barcelona-based architecture practice dedicated to low-energy design and thoughtful human-centered spaces. With over 20 years of experience, Sean leads a studio that blends deep sustainability expertise, such as Passivehouse design and adaptive reuse, with a design-led storytelling approach. His work spans private homes, cinemas, schools, and retail, all unified by a commitment to reducing carbon while elevating everyday experiences. Today, we are chatting about two projects with a focus on low-energy design, low-carbon technologies, and Passivehouse principles. These two projects are the Herbert Paradise Home and the Lexi Cinema, both in Kensal Rise, London. Nestled in the heart of Kensal Rise in northwest London, the Herbert Paradise House is a striking transformation of a 1930s mid-terrace property, and a former car park has been transformed into a vibrant new addition to the Lexi, the city's only social enterprise cinema. Designed by Rise Design Studio, the Herbert Paradise House and the Lexi Cinema are small but powerful examples of how architecture can support both community and sustainability through Passivehouse principles. Now, let's get into the details. Welcome back to Detailed. My guest today is Sean Ronnie Hill from Rise Design Studio, a London and Barcelona-based architecture practice dedicated to low-energy design and thoughtful, human-centered spaces. We are going to chat about two projects today. You're special. We get to chat about two projects. The focus on low-energy design, low-carbon technologies, and Passivehouse principles. These two projects are the Herbert Paradise Home and the Lexi Cinema, both in Kensal Rise, London, a place I visited only once but loved for a whole 48 hours. Sean, welcome to Detailed. How are you today?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me on the show. It's a real honor to be here.
It's an honor to have you, and I'm excited to talk about these projects. I work for a building enclosure design firm in my day job, and so Passivehouse is huge in our firm.
Right.
So
Well,
a lot of the same probably passions and motivations you have are very important in the firm that I work for as well. So I always start with an icebreaker question and that I just randomly pick. And so for you, I did, as I told you before we got started, I trolled you online a little bit. I did a little research to get to know a little bit about you, and I found some articles about an incredible transformation you made to your one-level ground floor apartment home that you share with your fashion designer partner and two daughters, who are adorable, by the way. So my question is, because it's quite the transformation, my question is, what made you embark on that renovation journey, and how did two creatives get through that process in one piece?
yeah, that's a very good question. I think it really started with a shared vision that Malika, my wife, and I had to how to rethink how we live. And, we spend our days designing myself designing homes for people, for others, and Malika clothes for others. But there's a lot of similarities in the creative industries. And we thought this was an opportunity for us to turn the lens onto ourselves. And our apartment, when we first moved in, when we first saw the apartment, it was a series of dark rooms, badly configured layouts. There was a lot that was wrong with it, a lot that wasn't really working out for modern day living. But we saw the potential, and Malika being a fashion designer and we both working in the creative fields, we cared deeply about craft and light and materiality. We're very aligned with a lot of things. So we decided, even though there were some original period features in the Victorian property, we decided we'd strip everything out and we'd start from scratch. And we were focusing on the quality of modern living and what we needed as a family of four. Well, we were a family of five because at that time, we had a little cat, um, which we designed a cool little cat flap for. Um, so yeah, we were focusing on the quality of the space rather than trying to cram it in a lot of stuff, and the flexibility. So we wanted the space to feel calm and consistent, and a real retreat from the city, and right from the dark space whenever you first enter to all the rooms come off one corridor. So we created that corridor to be a very dark, gloomy, moody space, and then all the rooms have a distinct, much lighter, much more calm uh, feel and color. There was a lot of challenges because we were both creatives, and we had a lot of late nights choosing many different finishes, and but we managed to get through it. It did test our relationship to quite some degree, but we managed to get through. And I suppose one small detail, which added a lot to the flat, was the black steel pivot lights that we designed, and they were wall mounted. We didn't want to pierce the ceiling in any way because we wanted to minimize any noise disruption from the apartment above. So it was a small detail, not something you noticed that much, but we felt it was a simple move, and it was kind of quite a smart one, and a reminder that thoughtful design is something oftentimes you don't even notice.
I didn't notice, but I can assure you that after this interview, I'll be going to relook at it because I didn't pick that up when I was looking at the pictures. But kudos to you. You very clearly have a very strong marriage if you survive that process. I have a lot of friends that are architects and a lot of friends that are couples who both the husband and wife are architects. And I have seen them go through this process, which was what triggered this question for you. It's like, if you don't kill each other, it's going to be a miracle. It is going
Yeah,
to be a miracle. So,
yeah.
well, congratulations. It's a beautiful home.
Thank you.
Let's talk about these projects. So let's start with, I'm just going to break them out separately because I think that'll be easier. So let's start with the Herbert Paradise home. Tell me what you started with here.
Well, Herbert Paradise was the client first contacted us before they bought the home, and they asked us to come and look at a couple of properties, and we recommended the property which they did buy in the end because of the site is splayed. So at the front of the street side, the property looks like every other property on the road, but there's a slight curve in the road. So then by the time you get to the back of the plot, it is twice as wide. So it meant that there was a lot of really interesting architectural moves that we could make at the back, and the space itself is a bit like a TARDIS because when you walk in, you're just expecting the same as every other property. Sort of couple of rooms on the ground floor, couple of rooms on the first floor, but because of the width, it's incredibly large. So it's a 1930s mid-terrace house. Had solid bones, as a lot of the houses do of that period. But it was, all the usual things. It was poorly insulated, the natural light, the configuration of the rooms, most of in terms of how we occupy houses today and how we use them, compared to 90 years ago. And yeah, the rooms didn't really speak to each other, so we saw the potential, and we really recommended they go with that property, which they did, and it was a real amazing opportunity for us as well as them to find a way to fully reimagine the spaces.
Well, that's a good lead into the next question. So, what were your goals for this deep retrofit? What were you at the outset looking to achieve here?
So we really wanted to push the boundaries of sustainable urban living, and luckily, well, with this project especially, the client came from the solar industry, so he had a great knowledge of that, and he was pushing um, microgeneration through solar panels a lot, which we did manage to do. We managed to include four arrays of um, solar panels, but the sustainable goals were incredibly important, and we wanted to try and figure out a way of um, applying this to a standard London terrace house. Even this one obviously had its quirks with the splayed site, but we were trying to do things that um, you know we could push the goal far beyond just making it energy efficient as well. We wanted to feel restorative and calm, almost like a sanctuary. And so the brief was all electric, lots of sensory rich, and to make it timeless.
So, give me a description of your design and the spaces in this home.
Well, we reimagined the ground floor with this split level. So we wanted to add volume, and also there was a slope in this side as well, which we wanted to take advantage of. The client was very keen. They were a young family. Actually, they had their little baby boy during construction. So whenever they moved in, they were a family of three, which actually a family of four because they they got a puppy as well. So so we wanted to create uh, a open plan space at the back of the house that was at the garden level. So you have more intimate, smaller spaces at the front of the house, and then very large open plan, much lighter spaces at the back of the house. And so that was to open up more generously and bring in more light. Um, what else? There is, I suppose, a quiet moment that we love was a circular roof light above the master ensuite shower on the top floor. It's a quite a private detail. Not everybody sees that, but it's we thought it was really transforms the space with a soft and calm light. Um, the rear extension fully open to the garden with clay plastered walls, and the kitchen living space now I feel fully connected with the outside. With and luckily for the client, there was like a mini orchard in the back garden of fruit trees. So we managed to save them during construction. They were protected, and they become the focal piece of the design in many ways, because at the very back of the garden there's a garden studio, which is quite large. It's 45 square meters, which I think in square feet is um I can't remember. Is it 10 times? I think it's 10 or 11 times. So 450 square foot. Um, so yeah, but the garden studio itself is a very peaceful space. It's a home office, a gym, and has a sauna in there too. So it enhances the disconnect from the home life.
Did you? I tend to throw in extra questions as you say things, so you can
That's
tell
okay.
me go away. I don't know, or I don't want to talk about that. But did you have to do much site work?
Yes, it was a good question. The garden studio itself, we the structure in conversation and in design during the design process, we had to resort to piling the foundations because there were very large mature trees, trees that were over 40 years old, and they had obviously, as we know, that very extensive root system. So the way to avoid any issues of subsidence was to actually pile the garden studio. It was only a single story outbuilding, but relatively large size in terms of the 45 square meters. And we came up with a little raft and the piled solution. So that dealt with any issues of the roots absorbing the water during and the growing movement.
What kind of challenges were you having to consider with this home in taking a 1930s home and turning it into a high performance home? That's apples to
Well,
oranges, obviously.
yeah, absolutely. No, they were built differently. I mean, I always like to tell clients like Victorian houses were actually built in the opposite way to the way that modern construction techniques are. Because Victorian houses were built to be drafty. You know, there was a fireplace in all the main rooms. The fire needed oxygen so that it cooled the air through under the doors, between the gaps in the windows, and that helped stoke the fire, but also reduced condensation. So you have less issues with mold growth and things like that. So obviously, with modern ways of constructing, air tightness is a huge um, issue, I would say, with retrofitting, and also a huge potential to massively increase the comfort of the spaces. So air tightness was one of the first things, which was very tricky um, to deal with because of the walls. There was lots of holes in the walls, and so all of the windows were replaced, as well as all of the floors. Um, and the roof, we were able to retain some of it to reduce the embodied carbon of the construction, but um, we had to replace quite a bit of it. But that meant that had a bit of carte blanche on the air tightness strategy. So we're able to include an air tightness layer in the appropriate place so that we weren't having any issues with condensation.
So I'm curious, obviously working for an enclosure consultant, um, what did you do with the enclosure of this home, the wall assemblies, insulation or the cladding? Did you do anything different to make the enclosure itself tighter?
Yeah, we included an air tightness layer. So in the roof, it was a membrane, in Tello membrane, was the name of the product. And then also in the floor of the proposed building was actually a solid buildup. So we would have our compacted hardcore, our structural slab, membrane insulation, and underfloor heating and screed. We actually didn't have a floor finish because the screed was the polished concrete, which was actually the floor finish. So obviously the floor quite straightforward in terms of the air tightness strategy because it's airtight, the solid buildup. In the roof, we had the membrane, as I was mentioned, so that was included. And within the roof, on the walls themselves, we included internal wall insulation at the front of the house, and then at the back of the house, we actually had cavity wall insulation. And then we were at all the junctions. We applied the air tightness tape to the windows and the doors. And then any perforations through the air tightness layer, we used a grommet. So like for the MVHR, for the mechanical ventilation heat recovery inlet and outlet, we used like a rubber grommet. So then that creates that air tightness around the puncture.
Describe for me one or two unique design features that you designed in this home.
We okay.
Or 12, however many you like.
Well, I mean, the split level works really well. I think, whenever you come into the property, you don't really notice. Okay, the stair itself is very contemporary. It's a birch ply stair, and then you have polished concrete floor throughout the whole of the properties. And as soon as you walk through the threshold, you've got polished concrete. So that on the ground floor, that is, and even the steps are made of polished concrete and all the way back to the garden studio. So you have one sort of material that links all of these spaces, but then the spaces are transformed quite dramatically depending on the finish of the decoration. So some of the spaces have clay plaster, some of them are painted, and we used the low VOC paints to ensure. Well, it was a young family, so it was important to them to reduce the VOCs. So you have a lot of drama between the upper ground floor spaces, and then as you drop down into the kitchen, also the expanse, the kind of expanse contraction of the spaces adds a lot. We have two slot roof lights in the kitchen and the dining space. So as the light comes through, it tracks along the floor, which adds a lot of drama to the space. You have the garden studio at the back, which is kind of nestled in. It's oiled in such a way, the finish of the timber, to look sort of like a garden fence. So it's not meant to look like another part of the house. It's meant to sort of melt into the background of the landscape and through the trees. What the actual garden studio itself had to be cut slightly, or sorry, not cut, but the design of the external wall had to scoot around one of the trees because of the floor space we wanted to create for the home office, as well as the gym and the sauna. So the client was fully on board with trying to retain the trees. And then I suppose lastly is the circular roof light again. Everyone who sees it, it's a real showstopper. Everyone is really enamored by the just that the feeling of that being in this shower space, and it for sort of like a semicircle, which then meets the roof light and creates this circular cut within the roof. Yeah.
I want one of those at my house now. Let's talk about sustainability. You did a lot here, and you've mentioned some of it, and you mentioned in the information you sent me using passive design strategies. Tell me about that process and the different ways that you made this a high performance home.
Okay. So the question's on the passive design strategies?
Yes. So tell me how you use those here.
So we were made a conscious effort to work with the building as opposed to against it. Um, Whenever it's a retrofit in terms of Passivehouse, you can't change the orientation. But we did look at using solar shading for the summer months. Okay, in the summer in the UK, it's you get a couple of months of the year where it can get really hot. Last summer wasn't so nice, but it it's depending, and depending on the year. But a couple of years ago, it was the warmest summer that the UK had ever had since the records began, and it seems to be going that way. In fact, someone said to me the other day, a couple of summers ago, he said, "Welcome to the coolest summer that you'll ever have," as in a reference to, every summer is just going to get hotter and hotter the way the climate change is going. So we were conscious of trying to catch the winter sun. So we're trying to warm the spaces and then trying to work out a strategy for overheating in the summer, which meant we tried to create as far as we could in terms of the planning, create deeper reveals, high performance glazing. We had the mechanical ventilation heat recovery, and the air tightness, obviously. We had and then insulation and air tightness level. So the insulation was incredibly high. It was probably double what the building regulations requires. So the client pushed us to increase the levels significantly, and all of these included brought down the energy use by 75%. So we were pretty happy with that, and the client is incredibly happy.
So another curveball question. I'm curious because some of us Americans are humble enough to admit that the UK has been quite a ways ahead of us in the design world for quite some time in making progress forward. I feel like we tend to lag behind things you guys figured out years before, but trying to catch up. In doing some of these different things in the building, I don't know what the building department process looks like in the UK. I know what it looks like here, but what did that process look like in getting your plans approved, or do you have to? What do you have to do?
So there's two different stages mainly in the UK. One is getting planning permission, so that's permission from the council to build what you would like to build. So that's planning permission, and then the other thing is to get building control approval. And building control, building regulations, they are a set of guidelines for how the building should be built, and it covers everything from, you know, fire to sustainability, in terms of the energy use of the building, to how stairs should be designed. Um, and so in the UK, with regards to sustainability, it's okay. I would say it's still quite far behind a lot of our European neighbors, especially I would say Scandinavia or Ireland, even the Republic of Ireland are very far ahead in term and Germany, where Passivehouse obviously comes from. So there is still a lot of work to do in the UK to try and push us into a much better place with regards to building a lot more robust, sustainable buildings. The I would say that there's a skills shortage even here. So if the government did have a policy, they were going to try and implement a carbon zero homes at a certain I can't remember what exact year that was meant to happen, but there's a huge skill shortage. If they brought that in and said even, for next year or the year after, there's a huge amount of consultants that would have to get trained up, as well as the contractors, everyone involved, from engineering to architecture to all the tradesmen on site to really understand what it is. Because Passivehouse itself relies a lot on how the building is built, and there's a lot of um, site inspections that have to happen to see that the builder's actually building it as per the drawings. Because there's a huge performance gap if even if the insulation where the insulation meets each other, if it's out by 1 or 2 millimeters, there's a lot of studies on that to state that it can affect massively how the building would perform. And insulation is one of the basic key components of a passive house design.
I've written a few passive house sections recently as a spec writer because that's what I do for a living,
Ah,
and it is a whole different ball game. And I think me as much as anybody else, it's a huge learning curve
yeah,
to wrap your head around because the requirements are so much stricter, and there's like you said, so much testing and inspections to make sure you're meeting all those goals. So that's
absolutely.
a major learning curve for me right now. Is dipping the toe into that arena and trying to figure out, okay, now how do we put this in our specifications so we're clearly describing it to, like you said, a whole lot of people who have not done work this way before.
Yeah,
In
yeah,
Oregon, in the United States, Oregon, the whole West Coast is way ahead of the game in the United States as opposed to other
right.
parts of the country here. But I think everybody's in that learning curve at some level.
Yeah, so quite a few years ago, whenever we were doing Passive House for sort of Passive House principles for the first time, we would often get toolbox talks. So that would be a consultant, say it was the MBHR consultant, and he's very au fait with the air tightness strategies. So he would come to site, he would do a talk, he would do a demonstration. How do you apply this tape? Because the tape itself is relatively straightforward, but say they don't wipe the surface of dust, or say they apply the tape and it's got kinks in it or something like that. He's showing them best practice. So you're hoping that the way it's installed, you're installing it for longevity, um, as opposed to just getting the job done and covered up, and then that's it. Because the air tightness, no one sees it until after the building is complete. No one sees it. Obviously, there is a crucial step before it's covered up for it to be checked and to make sure that you get the air tightness level that you're aiming for.
Well, it's also a very expensive thing to fix if you don't get it right. And you
Exactly.
have to
Yeah.
fix it. I have a couple windows downstairs in my home that in the wintertime I can stand in front of them and feel the air coming in. And it's
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
it, and they just did an entire enclosure project here in 2018. It's like
Okay.
I should not feel air coming through my windows. I didn't
Yeah.
live here at that time, but you
Okay.
know, and to fix it now would be incredibly expensive. And
Yeah.
so getting that right and having, I think education is really, if you're going to be working in this arena, education and really knowing what you're doing before you start, making sure you really understand it is probably the most critical component.
Yes. Prior preparation is key.
So, what advice would you offer other architects wanting to employ more sustainable urban living into their designs?
Yeah, I mean, it's just touches on what we just were talking about in terms of prior preparation. Start early. Don't treat sustainability as a line item or a bolt on at the end, or at a certain stage when you're halfway through the project. It will make it a lot more difficult, and it will impact a lot of the design decisions that were made, say, at an earlier stage. So if you're making design decisions, it should always be part of the DNA, in terms of, for example, the two slot windows in the Herbert Paradise project above the kitchen living space, they were between three arrays of photovoltaics, the solar panels. So we could get a maximum number on one side of the roof, maximum number in the middle, and then on the other side. So we had this space left over where we were able to create these two slots. And, there's a story behind it, does creates the drama within the spaces. So yeah, I would say to plan early, and um, make sure it's genuinely sustainable as opposed to a few add-ons at the end.
I might add to that, just most of my career has been in architecture, but now working where I do now. Also, don't be afraid to hire the experts to
Yes.
give you some
Yeah.
guidance if it's your first time out or even your first couple times out. It's a complicated process, well worth it in the end.
Yeah.
Um, but since I've been here at this firm, my brain feels like it's exploding every day with
Okay.
all of the
Wow.
new things, I'm having to learn because this firm is leveling way up in those arenas. And so I don't think if I was working in architecture, I think the first thing I would probably say to anybody in my office is, you need to go hire these people who really know what they're doing, because while no architect wants to pay one more consultant,
Hmm.
in this arena, the money you're going to save by getting that guidance is going to far cover whatever fee you had to pay to
Yeah.
get that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I
Just because
think
it's massive amount of information that you really
true.
need to understand.
Yeah, and if you're going through certification, it's very, very difficult.
So let's talk about the Lexi Cinema, because this is a really cool building. I took one look at that and I was like, I want to go there if I can ever find my way back to London again. So this is an interesting project. So we really need to talk first about what you started with in this building. Give me a little history and description.
So the Lexi was, and it still is, a very a much loved community cinema. It's tucked behind an Edwardian facade in Kensal Rise. And when we first visited the Lexi, it really had a lot of charm. Um, the cinema itself was created, and it was a conversion from uh, a it was a theater many years ago, many years previous, but then it became like a community hall, where locals used to have their birthdays, and there was pool tables and all sorts. So then they converted it from that to the cinema on a shoestring budget. So the cinema already, it was only 10 years since the renovation, but it already looked very tired, and there was a lot of issues because there was a lot of scrimping and saving in terms of the final specification of the original cinema. So it was one screen. It wasn't totally step free. It was something that was important to the client. Also, it had limited facilities, but it was entirely run by, and it is entirely run by volunteers. So it had a big heart and it had a big mission. and all of the profits go to a charity. So it has this amazing social spirit that really gave us a strong brief, and we found that we weren't just extending a building; it was extending a set of the clients and the community's values.
What was the building originally? Because I looked at that building and I thought that looks like it was a church at one time or part of an old church.
It does look. It's a strange, or not strange, very unique design, and it was it was a theater. So where
Mm.
you have screen one, where the screen is of screen one, that is were just behind the screen. That's where the theater was. That's where the performance would have been the stage. So they pushed obviously that forward, and then behind that they used that for. At the moment, they use that for the manager's office.
How old is that building? I don't remember if I saw that.
So Edwardian, more than 100 years old. Yeah,
I figured that. I hadn't recalled seeing that in any of the information I looked at. But it's not when I saw cinema in your project description before I started looking at the actual project. That
yeah.
building was not what I expected to see. It wasn't even
No, very
remotely
much
what,
not.
and I just went, oh, that's why I said, can we talk about both of these projects? Because it was such a just a unique building,
Yeah,
you know,
totally. It was,
for what I would expect to see
yeah,
in this day and age.
and I suppose as part of the process, the client was really keen to have wayfinding specialist on board, and actually a friend of mine who's a wayfinding designer specialist, he came on board pro bono because there wasn't actually a budget for his involvement, but he really believed in the values of the project, and he created the new logo and then the wayfinding signage within, which actually won an award, or won a Red Dot award. So it was a big part of it. And I think what the client was finding was that, people were passing not knowing it was a cinema. So the logo on the front was very important, and the neon lighting, to try and to make sure that people don't just pass it and think, oh, there's another period, because there's so many period buildings along that stretch that you don't just mistake it for one more. So there was quite a bit of work on that.
I fell in love with it as soon as I saw it. Like the first thing I thought was I would totally go there. So this sounds like it was a pretty radical transformation. Tell me about your design for this project and what you were planning. You had what you had, but what you were planning to do with it.
So the design, the goal was to future-proof Lexi, um, but the project takes two parts, because whenever we first approached the Lexi, they asked us, could you help us out with a few things that don't work in the cinema? And that was the line. And we just said, yeah, sure, we're local. And we had no idea that sort of like 6 years later, they would be saying to us, would you design a new screen in a little slither of car park that exists at the back? And I never knew it was there. That nobody realized that they had that, because they had just used it as a storage space, and they couldn't really think of a way, because the access to it was very tricky. There was lots of little factors that kind of made it a space that nobody really could see what the future of that space could be. But luckily, there was someone who worked in Brent Council, Alice Lester, who was a member of Alexi, and that's the local council, Brent, and she was very helpful, and we were able to create quite an open dialogue with them in terms of the proposals. And so the project evolved. I suppose what I'm trying to say is that the timeline of this project is very unusual, because 6 years previous to the client, Sally, asking us to create a design for a second cinema screen, we were just doing like odd jobs around the cinema. and then trying to convince contractors to come in and do these jobs, because most contractors, if they haven't been involved, they don't want to get, because oftentimes it'll open up a can of worms depending on the previous contractor's work. So yeah, it was a very unusual timeline, but it was something that we're incredibly proud of, because to have normally when we design a building, it's a house, and it's only the client and their friends and their family see it. But to be involved in a community project, that's something that means so much to the community, and something that provides so much to so many different every part of the community you can imagine. It has a night or an afternoon or um, an educational series, or it has activities for the whole of the community in that area. So it's quite an incredible building.
So what you've described so far, the people that work there are volunteers, and they didn't really have a budget for somebody to do the wayfinding. Um, I guess first, is this what we would call here a public facility, or is this privately owned
It's
or
owned by
nonprofit?
what's called a social enterprise in the UK, and it's close to being a charity,
Okay.
because there are one or two people that are permanently employed. So the director of the cinema and also the director of programming, I think, and then everybody else is a volunteer. And then all the profits, apart from the operational costs of the will go to a charity. So it's as close as you can get to a charity, I suppose.
We call that in the US, we call that a nonprofit. Okay, so that makes more sense to me. So now I'm really curious. Your description says that this project was again designed using Passivehouse principles, um, which surprises me because I have worked on nonprofit projects before, and budget is typically the be all to end all. I mean, you have to watch every
Yeah.
penny. So tell me about the material choices and sustainable features in this building.
Well, so the charity, sorry, for where all the profits go to is called the Sustainability Institute, and it's based actually in South Africa.
Okay.
And it goes towards a community finding their feed and providing educational resources to that community. So the client was very keen on sustainability, and was keen that we baked it in to the project from day one. So we used a timber frame for low embodied carbon. There was a concrete superstructure, but the secondary structure was all timber, and we wrapped it in um, air tightness. But we had very high levels of thermal and acoustic insulation. Well, just insulation that performed both ways for making sure that there was no leakage of sound, because it's nestled within a residential area. So the screen too backs onto a lot of gardens, and the houses aren't that far away from the cinema. So there's a concern, and there was always a requirement in terms of building regulations and planning to make sure that we didn't have to make sure that we minimized the acoustic any noise leakage. And so included in that, we have a MVHR system and an air-to-air source heat pump, and we think it's the first cinema in the UK to use this to regulate the temperature of a screening room with these systems. So it was quite amazing for us to convince the client, but obviously and it touches on what we were discussing earlier, making sure that we had the specialists on board. We had the MVHR specialist on board. We had the air source heat pump specialist on board, and there's a lot of in-depth discussions as to how do we make this work? How do we make sure that we are not going to create a space that overheats in the summer and is too cool in the winter? Too cool in the winter was quite easy because we had so much insulation, and retrospectively, it worked really well in the summer too, because we have the green roof on the top, which you mentioned before, but also outside the cladding is a buff steel, so there's some reflectivity in that in terms of the solar gain in the summer.
So so tell me about the design of the interior spaces. How is that different now than what it was before? What did you do there? What kind of spaces are there now? Or did you just take what was there already and enhance it?
So there's one other another important factor I think I need to mention, and that was during construction. Oh, there's two things I suppose I should mention here. One is that the client managed to gain funding from the local council and also from the community for the whole project. It was through funding, also from London Mayor, and we had a budget to create Screen 2. So that was a new build, and there was a little bit of work needed to be done to create the connection to the existing building. And about, say, halfway through construction of Screen 2, I get a phone call at sort of 3 in the morning, and it's like the contractor, and he tells me there's a fire. And obviously my heart sank, and we go to site, and by the time we get there, fortunately the fire brigade had been, and they came very quickly, and there was very little damage from the fire itself in terms of the flames of the fire, but there was extensive damage from the smoke. So what had caught fire was a small electrical fridge that was in the existing box office, and that was at the front of the existing cinema. And by the time the fire brigade came, and part of their strategy, I think, was to try and get the smoke out of the building as fast as possible, they broke down some of the doors, and then they broke through the ceiling and a roof light. So they were trying to take the smoke out as quickly as possible. And the smoke, by the time all of this had happened, had managed to seep into a lot of the materials and damage various things like the projector and like the screen, all the plaster, all the acoustic wall paneling. The flooring was okay because it was a existing timber floor. But the it was it was a make or break moment, because the insurance guys, whenever they came to site, their stance was very much, it's you're guilty until proven innocent. And obviously our client was very taken aback by this, and they had to send their forensic team and to make sure there was no foul play and it wasn't an insurance job. And fortunately, it all came through, but there was a period of a couple of weeks where the insurance were going backwards and forwards, and they weren't, they were holding their cards very close to their chest. But what this meant was it was a silver lining, because instead of us just designing the Screen 2 extension, it meant there was a budget to refurb the whole of Screen 1 and the existing building, which was really tired. So the client, in many ways, after like a moment of extreme shock and thinking that they would have to close, it turned out incredibly well, because of the budget to refurbish the existing Screen 1. And that meant that we could create a strategy that connected all of the circulation spaces, which were a bit like a rabbit warren because of the old building, and then to create two distinctive screening rooms, one with a dark navy blue color, and then the other one with an emerald green for Screen 2. So that was some of the so I suppose leading on to Screen 2 itself, Screen 2 in terms of the architecture, the spaces were that we sunk it down into the ground, so by about 1.5 meters. So that helped to reduce the mass and also respect the neighboring gardens and reduce this kind of object at the end of I think it was about 10 people's gardens that we were backing onto. And but inside it doesn't feel small. It feels immersive, comfortable, and the Screen 2 has the emerald green seating and a space for panel discussions as well as wheelchair users.
That's a pretty incredible story. You must have just been sick when you got that phone call.
Yeah, it was a shock to everyone involved in the project. We were all, because it could have been, that they would have had to stop works just because they might not have had any a way forward to fund the renovation works.
Well, I'm a big fan of finding the silver linings, and I mean, I don't wish that kind of stress on anybody, which I'm sure for everybody involved, it was terribly stressful.
Yeah,
But they, whatever it is, things happen for a reason. And it sounds like the silver lining ended up being pretty great for
yeah, it
the
was very
Lexi
much so.
Cinema.
Yeah, that
Well,
was absolutely fantastic.
usually I ask more questions about construction, but because we're covering two projects, I wasn't getting into that too much. So thank you for offering that. I love construction stories. That one is like, wow. Very interesting. So we talked about the building department approvals a little bit when we're talking about the house. Did you have any special challenges on this project with getting, this is a pretty drastic difference in things you're doing. Any special challenges with getting your approval on this building?
I mean, the fire definitely was one of the biggest challenges. In terms of building regulations, I suppose it wasn't so much. The challenge wasn't so much to do with building regulations. It was mainly to do with the sheer number of cables that are required to design a cinema. We had hundreds of cables going from front to back of the building, and we had to make sure that we created various cable routes and underneath floors and vertically as well to make sure that they all have access, so that for future maintenance, make sure a lot of the Cat6, the internet cables, they were doubled up, so that if one dies, then at least they have another one without having to pull through another cable. So that the strategy for that was quite a lot of in-depth discussions with the specialists, the AV specialists, the audiovisual specialists, making sure that and there were quite a few on this project. The client was keen to honor existing relationships that they had over the years. And so we had a specialist for the screen design, we had a specialist for the projector design, and we had another one that was involved with all of the kit, all of the screening equipment. And we had another one for the acoustics of the space. So trying to marry up the conversations and the advice from all of these different specialists was quite a challenge, I would say. Another thing to add, actually, this project was built during COVID. So we had another sort of layer of complexity, which involved the contractor having the foresight to pre-order and bulk order quite a lot of materials, because he foresaw that the COVID, well, I don't know whether he foresaw lockdown or what he saw, but he thought there's going to be issues with supply chain with the way things are going. And fortunately, we were at the stage where we only needed the skim plaster and the plasterboard. And so he bulk ordered them and managed to store them on site, and means that we had a clear run through with a small delay. But given, the circumstances and COVID being nothing like anyone had ever seen before, it was pretty amazing.
Supply chain issues were a nightmare during
Yeah.
COVID. You could be getting some of the things you need, no problem, and other things were tripling or quadrupling in price if you could find it at all, or it was 6 months out or 9 months out and you need it next week.
Absolutely.
That was not a fun. I'm glad we're past that. Really glad. You mentioned something called the Hub. What is that? Tell me about that.
So the Hub's the name that the client, so Sally and her team, wanted to give to the new extension, Screen 2. So it included the bar, the foyer, and the flexible education space and the screen. So that was a space as part of their funding campaign. They gave that what they wanted to make sure that it was all encompassing, and they wanted to really emphasize the fact that it would broaden their reach in terms of who they served or what they offered to the community. So they called it the hub.
One thing I noticed on this building, which and I don't know why, but kind of surprised me, is maybe it's the age of the building, is that you have a green roof, which
Yeah, so that was
surprised me. Tell me about that.
so the green roof was on the screen too. It was kind of like we gave the building a little bit of hair on top of the new element that we built. So we have this buff steel wrapping around above the level of the existing brick gardens. So when the Victorians built all the surrounding houses, they built the gardens with brick walls between them. And so what we were doing is we're kind of like echoing. What we wanted to do was to reflect the sky, so reducing the massing, and we continued the height. So that was our datum, and we continued. So we had the brick along the base of the new part of the new building, and then it was the steel which reflected the sky. So they had like an outdoor cinema screen almost, with it changing every day. And then on top of that was the green roof. And then the green roof was is a big winner for the bees. They had to actually have a bee catcher come because there were too many bees at one point. So there was a hive, I'm not sure the terminology of bees, but there was a swarm. So a swarm came, and then a bee catcher had to come and then take them away. But it's quite fun part to the project. Helps with the rainwater runoff, and also obviously with the biodiversity.
I suppose, especially considering it's a nonprofit, I was surprised that you were able to get that in. I know that I find writing specifications for green roofs are some of the most difficult specifications to write, because there's just so many components, and if you don't get it right, a green roof can be a nightmare.
This is very true. Yeah, we had to be careful and make sure we detail that correctly. And but with that one, I suppose we had managed to push the design quite far and understand the costs quite well before the funding happened. So we there were some things that had to be kind of crossed out when the funding did come through. But the green roof, fortunately, was in conversation to be binned, but it didn't in the end.
What are you most proud of on this project?
And I think the project delivers on many levels, and it's low energy, low carbon. Most people think it's quite a beautiful, sympathetic building to the it's a contemporary building, but it fits well within its context, and it's I think we're proud to be involved in the fact that it's a community building and it's a continuation of the Lexi story. And Sally, the founder of the cinema, has said it feels like it's a natural evolution of their mission, which kind of, and she's got plans for the next part of the journey, which is great. But I think that'll take some time. Just what she's thinking about. So yeah, we're really happy with the feedback that we've had, and yeah.
Well, I imagine a lot of people are going to have some great experiences and benefits from being there. So the impact it'll have going forward, you'll never really know, but it'll be substantial.
Yeah.
Choosing either of these projects to draw from, or both, what did you learn that made you an even better architect on the next project?
I think we talk about this a lot actually when we first meet clients, and each project had its challenges, but we feel like collaboration really is everything. You know, um, whether it's learning to provide information for the insurance people through a project because of a fire, or you know, to make sure that you're adaptable, and you try to be as clear as possible with your communication. So the collaboration between all of the many players, because oftentimes when you ask people who are not involved in construction, you're the arch. You'd often say, well, you're the architect, you kind of do everything, but it's obviously not. That's definitely not the case. There's so many uh, incredible um, specialists and consultants that are involved, and every year it becomes that bit more complex, and we need more specialists to be able to. So as an architect, we're very much in the middle, and we just have to make sure that the collaboration is working well for a successful project, and we feel that the team is really gelled, and then we can kind of feel that the project's going to be a success.
I love that answer because I think that there is no more important thing in our business than being really, really good at communicating and collaborating. Because so many, like you said, like my kids, they have no idea what I really do for a living. They just she writes some book about buildings. That's probably the answer they'd give you. But the general public really doesn't understand what happens, that building that they walk into every day, what it took, and how many people
Absolutely.
had to be involved, and how many specialists have to come to the table to make that happen. And but yet we fall down in that area a lot in our business, in really focusing on that communication and collaboration that saves so much time and money in the long run.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, absolutely.
or a better project just by being really good at it. So yeah, no higher calling in my opinion. So before we get to our two closing questions, tell me what's next for Rise Design Studio? What are you working on now that I get to call you about later and hear more about one of your projects?
We're actually expanding our presence into Barcelona, which is on the northeast coast of Spain, and we're designing a multifunctional space, which includes a retail store for a fashion brand, and a workshop area, and also a little space for our studio. Um, and then back in London, we're working on a series of deep retrofits similar to the house project that we have just gone through. Also, a sustainable tennis pavilion for a community club, and then just outside the city, we are working on a large new build Passivehouse family home in Surrey, which is in the countryside, which is a rare opportunity to apply our low energy design principles from the ground up in a rural setting, and it should be a real showcase for contemporary architecture.
So you'll have to let me know when you're done. You just call
Yeah,
me up. Hey,
absolutely.
Cherise, I got another one. You don't need to wait for an invitation.
Okay,
So,
excellent.
so we always close with two questions. The first being a little bit more broad industry question, and then the final question we ask everybody. So you mentioned something in the information that you sent me that I was not familiar with. So I'm asking you to teach me something today.
Okay.
What exactly, and I did look it up and got a brief description, and I thought, okay, that's just like way too big for my brain. So I'll let Sean tell me what this is. What exactly is digital twin technology, and how is it shaping the future of sustainable architecture?
Okay. Well, I'll try and break it down. It is basically what it boils down to is that a digital twin is essentially a 3D virtual replica of a building. Um, but it's actually much more than a pretty model that you can walk through. It's a it's a fully we're not quite there yet with the fully interactive simulation, but that's the way things are going in terms of BIM. and it allows you to test drive being able to see spaces in 3D, which a lot of our clients are not fluent with, which is not surprising because they don't spend all their days looking at plans and sections and that. So having the ability to walk through spaces and trial options is a huge benefit, not only from the early stages when we're doing optioneering, but also during construction whenever a contractor is eventually looking at it and telling us that they need some more information on X, Y, and Z, and they can very easy pull up information, mark it up on a screen, send it to us. So there's a lot more fluidity, a lot less, a lot more time saved, but it also allows you to simulate how the building will perform. So you can use it for things like testing energy use, daylight, how the sunlight enters. Also, if you get really technical, you can go into thermal bridges. So we do obviously create 2D um, construction details, but if it's a very particular detail, you might want to create it in 3D, which we have done in the past, which allows us to then have a greater, more in-depth discussion with the structural engineer and any other consultants that might be involved in whatever's happening in that little corner of the building.
So do you think that, because I do think that's our future, do you think that's our future, that everything's going to be happening in this 3D model and for everybody, and we'll do all of it in that?
Yeah, I do. There's more and more of it happening. And, I did see, we're not at this level at all, but I did see a presentation not so long ago about a 3D digital model where the maintenance team of a school were looking at it, and one of the bulbs had of say one of the rooms and needed to be replaced. So they clicked on it in 3D, and it was able to tell them what the bulb was, and then where to order it from. And then they're saying, like, further down the line, it'll just be a matter of clicking on the bulb and saying replace, and then a replacement will arrive to the building. So it's quite incredible, really.
Wow. I can't even imagine. Let's see if I'm around long enough to see all of that come to fruition.
Well, it's moving very fast. It's all
Uh,
moving very fast.
it all has been moving very fast for a while now. It's a little difficult to keep up, don't you think? I feel like every
Yeah.
time I turn my head, there's some new technology or some new software, some new way of doing things.
Yes. Yeah. Especially with AI, and there's so much out there. You're right. It's hard to keep a track of everything. But part of our weekly schedule should be just to keep an eye on things and seeing if there's anything that can help us.
I do a lot of mentoring, and I often tell younger professionals that I'm teaching or mentoring that if at any time in this industry you feel like, okay, now I'm an expert, please get out of this industry, because you're never going to be an expert. This is a lifelong learner business. This isn't learning one thing and then just being good at it the rest of your career. Lifelong learner
Absolutely.
business that changes every 5 minutes. And if you can't
Yeah.
function in that mindset, you're not ever going to make it
Yeah. Totally agree.
in this industry. So, final question. Everybody gets this one. I jokingly say it's the easiest question of the day. We all hope to live a life that leaves some kind of contribution to make this world a better place. Personal or professional, what do you hope your impact will be?
I hope that our work will help shift this perception that sustainable design is a compromise. Now, whenever I was at university, sustainable design was very rarely talked about. There was one sort of section of um, the course which dealt with it, but not in any great depth, I don't feel. So, and everyone else at that time did that was teaching us did sort of talk about it as a afterthought. definitely wasn't something integrated. So I think there is a mindset shift there that we're trying to teach or spread the word that to change that perception, and that sustainable design can be beautiful, soulful, and ambitious. And the future generations can live in homes and spaces that actually do honor the planet, and as well as their everyday lives.
Sean, thank you so much for joining me today. Great conversation. I love both of these projects. I hope you'll come back and join us again in the future.
Absolutely. It was an absolute pleasure.